The gospel reading of the sermon today comes from Luke chapter 24. It's one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible. Like I said, Luke 24 along with 1 Corinthians 15 go together perfectly. They're my favorite resurrection readings. So, we'll read this, talk about it. I'm going to try to be, I shouldn't tell you I'm going to try to be brief, but I'm going to try to be brief in my sermon. So maybe only 45 minutes or so. All right, let me just read the great story here from Luke 24. Just listen. Very early in the morning, on the first day of the week, the women went to the tomb, bringing the fragrant spices they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. They didn't know what to make of it. Suddenly, two men were standing beside them in gleaming bright clothing. The women were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He isn't here, but has been raised. Remember what he told you while he was still in Galilee? The human one must be handed over to sinners, be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words. When they returned from the tomb, they reported all these things to the 11 and all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. Their words struck the apostles as nonsense, and they didn't believe the women. But Peter ran to the tomb, and when he bent over to look inside, he saw only the linen cloth. He returned home, wondering what had happened. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. There's several things to notice first about this passage. There's a lot of disbelief. There's a lot of wondering. There's a lot of questions. They thought it was nonsense. They didn't know what to make of this. They didn't believe the women. Women did it! But that's just a side note. I hadn't written this into the sermon. But the very first witnesses of the resurrection and people to proclaim the resurrection were women, which in that culture and context is crazy. It's one of the other crazy things about this story. That they would even write down that the girls told them first. Literally, partly because a woman's, and if you've been in church, you've heard this, but a woman's testimony wasn't even valid in court. It didn't matter what a girl said. Nobody would believe it. So that the Christians recorded this into the story, one of the reasons we think that it's probably true, because nobody making this up would ever say that the girls saw it first. That's just, it would be so ludicrous you wouldn't do it. Speaking of the theme of being ludicrous, the fact that Jesus rose from the dead was ludicrous. Absolutely nonsense. As this little passage shows so wonderfully. They didn't know what to make of this. They didn't believe the women. They wondered about it. There was just disbelief all over the place. The Jews of the day had lots of expectations. They expected a Messiah to come. They expected and wanted Rome to be chased out of their country. They expected a king, a Jewish king, to sit on the throne in Jerusalem and rule their own people again. They hoped for, desperately wanted all of that stuff. They also believed in a resurrection. Deeply. They thought that the resurrection was real and would happen at the end of time. On the great and terrible day of the Lord, then they expect the resurrection to happen. So, Jesus comes along and messes with every single one of their expectations in such crazy ways. It's another reason we think this is probably true. So there were a lot of messiahs. I don't know if you realize this. James was just talking about a documentary. There's all kinds of other books that were written early in Christianity. Lots of other messiahs in Jewish history. And most of those other messiahs ended up getting killed on a cross, just like Jesus. Jesus' story is not unique in that at all. Romans killed people like Jesus all the time. The bizarro thing about this Jesus story is that the followers of Jesus didn't just cry that their Messiah died. They started saying that the resurrection happened to him. And nobody ever expected that. Completely unexpected. That's the first thing I want you to hear about the resurrection, is that it is completely unexpected for all of those reasons. They expected the resurrection at the end, not in the middle. They expected the Messiah to be political, not spiritual. They expected the enemy to be defeated. They expected that to be Rome. What Jesus defeated was death itself. Everything about the story is unexpected. Completely unexpected. Second thing I want you to get about this story is that it is physical. Flesh and blood, physical. Now, this is where the 1 Corinthians and Luke 24 go together. The passage that Julia read again so beautifully, thank you, Julia. Paul is talking to people in 1 Corinthians who think that there's no such thing as resurrection. And what Paul is saying is that if there is no resurrection of the dead, not afterlife, we've got to make this clear. By resurrection of the dead, we don't mean live in heaven after you die. So we've all watched Bugs Bunny, right? And right? Well, some of the younger kids have not watched Bugs Bunny. This is a tragedy. Oh, good, yeah. You know Elmer Fudd, right?
No. What?
All right. My analogies have to get updated, apparently. Remind me, we need to start watching Bugs Bunny cartoons so my sermon makes sense. So, there's this guy named Elmer Fudd who likes to kill things. It's a hunter. Yes, somebody can do a voice that sounds like it.
What?
Thank you, yeah. So, Elmer Fudd will periodically kill Bugs Bunny. When Elmer Fudd kills Bugs Bunny, what happens to Bugs Bunny? His body stays on the ground, and then his spirit will peel off of it, and he'll have wings and a halo and a heart. He floats up into the clouds, right? That's what we think happens. It's because of Bugs Bunny. It's also what the teenagers think, and I don't know why you think it. I know I think it because of Bugs Bunny. At any rate, that's what we have in our brain, something like that. That's not resurrection of the dead, because the body is still on the ground. That's just the spirit continuing to exist. When the Jews thought resurrection, and when Paul is talking resurrection, he means Bugs Bunny gets life back in Bugs Bunny's body and walks around with him. Okay? So that's what we mean by resurrection. So Paul's talking to people who don't believe in resurrection, and he says if there's no resurrection, then Jesus hasn't been resurrected either. And if Jesus hasn't been raised from the dead, your faith is worthless. It's nothing. Stupid. Everything about Christianity hangs on the resurrection. If Jesus wasn't raised from the dead, go home. Don't celebrate Easter. Just eat food just because food is good. But Jesus, and this is the great line in 1 Corinthians 15. Oh, before I do this, let's pause. You're going to have to wait in suspense. The great line is coming up. But before we get there, I'll let you turn and talk to one another. Haven't done this in a while. It's kind of fun to do. So just turn and share with somebody your favorite fruit in the entire world. Your favorite fruit. What's your favorite fruit? Best fruit ever. I'll give you 30 seconds to do this. So be quick. Just turn around. Tell some people what your favorite fruit is. Everybody say go. Time's up. Yeah. Those who are normally in the congregation oftentimes get a minute or two to talk. So they're talking about sports now. So. Fruit thing doesn't need to take this long. All right. Somebody, let me hear a couple. What's your favorite fruits?
Papaya.
Papaya.
Why?
picking down at Schneck Farms. And it was late in the spring and warm, which means that the ripe peaches were almost cooking on the tree, which is almost so good. And so, people would go by and pick peaches, and they'd be all picked right up to about this level. The trees are bigger than that, and so we would take our child lift up above the peach line, and she could get more peaches. There were times she would reach for the peach and grab it and pull it down, and it would skin the peach on the tree. Just, and then it would juicy, stand up. It was just so good. Now, I like peaches so much that we planted in our previous house. I planted 3 different peach trees. 3 different ones that would ripen at different times in the season. Because peaches only stay ripe for like a week or 2 on the tree, and then you're done. So you can extend that by getting different varieties. One that ripens very early in the season, a mid-season peach, and late season peach. And enjoy peaches for like a whole month and a half or 6 weeks. It's great. Now, coming up towards peach ripening season, the whole process, you see the blooms on the tree, and you're like, yes, they're flowering, and there's bees, I'm going to have fruit, and then their little flowers would fall off, and there'd be little infantile peach buds on the tree all over the place. And you'd go look at them and check them and watch them grow and get excited. And then they'd start to change color. So they're getting big now, they're changing color. And every single morning, you walk outside, and you touch your peaches. And you're looking and waiting and hoping that there'll be some ripe peaches. And for weeks, you're disappointed. Because they stay hard for way too long. One day, and I used to record this day and write it down because it was the greatest day ever. One day, you squeeze one of those little pink peaches, and it gives way. And it's soft. And if you're the one that found it, you can eat it right there. And that first peach is what you call a first fruit, or the first crop. Which brings us back to the best verse in the Bible, maybe. Well, today. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead. He is the first crop of the harvest of those who have died. When I grab that first peach, I'm excited because I know there's an entire tree just like it coming. Christ is the first fruits, or the first crop of the harvest of those who are dead, which means that what happened to Jesus will happen to everybody. Resurrection. Not just spirit floating into the sky, but an empty tomb, somebody with feet and a mouth that can eat fish and everything and peaches. And this brings us back to Luke 24. So what does this mean? What is this first fruit of Jesus? We read the first part of Luke 24, when he is raised, and it is unthinkable that it would happen in all those ways. But what is the resurrection? It is physical, and it is real. They went back and they're trying to figure out, somebody else sees Jesus and it's crazy, and then they go hide in the upper room, the apostles, after the story is read. Not just the apostles, but them and the women and a bunch of others. While they were saying these things, talking about all the craziness that was just bizarre happening, Jesus himself stood among them. He said, "Peace be with you." And they were terrified and afraid. They thought they were seeing a ghost because they're not thinking physical resurrection. This is so outside of bounds, thinking that they're not even thinking about it, even though they've already seen it happen. They can't get their brain around it. They think they see a ghost. And Jesus said to them, "Why are you startled? Why are doubts arising in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. It's really me. Touch me and see. For a ghost doesn't have flesh and bones like you see I have." He is the first fruits of those who fall asleep. What happens to Jesus happens to the rest of the tree. This is what to expect. Flesh and bones. As he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. Because they were wondering and questioning in the midst of all of their happiness, he said to them, so they're still not believing it. And because he knew they were still trying to figure this out, are you really real? He says, do you have anything to eat? And they gave him a piece of baked fish. Taking it, he ate it in front of them. The resurrection is physical. First thing I want you to get is it is unexpected. Crazy! Bizarro! Nuts that anyone would ever think of such a thing. Nuts that it happens in the middle of history, not at the end of history. That it starts early. One ripe peach, way before the rest of the tree's ready. Happens to Jesus. Crazy. Second thing is that it is physical. Flesh and bones. Able to eat fish. But also very different. This means, by the way, that death really dies. If Bugs Bunny's body stays dead and his spirit lives in the clouds, Bugs Bunny's still dead. Death isn't defeated. It's just kind of sidestepped because you get a spirit that lives. For death to die, the body gets life back into it. When Adam and Eve were created, they were created from the dust of the earth. Stuck. Physical. They were created as spirits in the given bodies. They were created as physical things and then made alive by the breath of God.
Yes.
When we are raised from the dead, we will be like we were supposed to be. And that is in part physical. Jesus is alive physically. So crazy, 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 physical, real, physical, and involved. The third thing, and final thing, is that this changes everything. This changes everything. Jesus is really alive. God embodied that. It's good to think, by the way, the difference between Lazarus' resurrection and Jesus' resurrection. Lazarus ends up dying again. He had a resuscitation of a normal body. Lazarus got old, sick, died. Jesus, when he got his body back, was part of the resurrection. He was fundamentally changed and is still alive. So that's another way to think about what the resurrection is. Just those differences. But it changes everything. That the resurrection happened. That the future broke into history. That we know for sure there's a crop of resurrection coming at the end. He is the first fruits. Changes everything. It changes what your priority should be. It changes what your allegiance should be. What do you care about? The world, politics, money, pleasure? What? What do you care about? What are you really following? All of that should change because Jesus rose from the dead. That is big. And it means claims on your life. And each of us will have a different reaction to that. Will require something different from each of us. So the service will continue for quite some time, but I want you to ponder what that means for you. Everything has changed. Let that soak into you. What does it mean? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for us? Completely unexpected. Craziness. Physical. Real. Future breaking into the present. Which changes everything about my life and yours.